So we are back for the afternoon session of our Machines That Fail Us conference. I am very, very happy to introduce Stefania Milan. Stefania Milan is a professor of critical data studies at the Department of Media Studies at the University of Amsterdam. She was also the formerly faculty associate at the Berkham Klein Center for Internet Society at Harvard University. Stefania has been leading different projects. Her latest project is concerned with innovation and the connection between citizenship and digital networks. She had also carried out the project between 2015 and 2021 on data activism, looking at civil society engagement with data and activism. She was effectively one of the first to speak about data justice, creating also initiatives like the Big Data from the South initiative. She is author of different books. I'm not going to read them all. Also, quite exceptionally, she managed to obtain 2 ERC grants. I don't know if you know how difficult it is to get ERC grants, but in academic settings, that's the best that you could do. I am very, very proud to have her here to talk about her research. Part of the reason why I have invited Stefania over was because she wrote an article in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic, which looked at the standard human in contact tracing apps, and how contact tracing apps effectively were based on an idea of standard human that did not account for the pluriverse of human culture and experience. And so she really influenced some of the key ideas of the Human Error Project and my work altogether. Another fun fact, you're going to see that we have a little guy on the floor. The truth is that Stefania and I met many years ago at a conference, 10 years ago at a conference, in which I was pretty much in the same situation. I had a very tiny little guy with me, and I looked at her and I said, "Can you hold her for a second?" And this is us 10 years later trying to make it work. So, but thank you, Ste, and I'll take care of Emma.
Thank you so much, Veronica. I'm super, super happy to be here. Not only is my first time in St. Gallen, I'm truly impressed by this university, what I've seen so far. But I consider Veronica and Philip very, not only awesome academics, but also great friends. And so it is a particular pleasure for me to be here in their company. I really have to apologize because I came in, last night. But for the safety of your conversations this morning, we were elsewhere, but we also have to take off immediately afterwards. So I'm one of those nasty people who just come to hear themselves speaking. And I hate it. But her father is also an academic, also on tour. So this is the best we could do today. And hopefully it's not going to be too distracting for you and for me as well. So thank you very much for the kind introduction, Veronica. I've been asked to talk a little bit about the techno-solutionism and the standard human, which is in fact not my idea. My idea was just to apply it to, the thinking about technology and how technologies are deployed today in society. But I'm also going to try to put together a variety of insights from different projects that I have held or I will coordinate in the near future. So there's a mix of findings that are actually there, like empirical data, but also hypotheses that I want to test as I start working in the new, indeed, ERC-funded project that we're going to only start in 2025. I have to say, this is a room full of smart people. The project that gathered us here is also, I've produced fantastic insights. I'm really not sure I can add anything new to the conversation. But here I am nonetheless. I want to start from this picture. This is an error of those that you were discussing this morning. It's in Dutch, but it's a very telling sentence. So the title says, proof that you are human, that you are a human being. And this was a message that was recurrently served to the student you see there in the picture, that not by chance has a darker complexion, who was sitting through an exam in computer science at the Free University of Amsterdam during the pandemic. So imagine you're a student, we've all been students, probably, as for my case, quite some time ago, but I still remember vividly how, tense an exam situation is. Imagine it's the pandemic, you're already isolated from your friends, family, colleagues. You're taking this exam. There is a software. It's one of the proctoring softwares, as they're called. So used to invigilate remote examination when you cannot be in the classroom. But the software does not recognize you as a human. So not only there's the tension of the exam, but you keep being pushed out of the exam room, the virtual room, because you're not human. What's the problem there? What's the error? The problem is that the software that was being used was not optimized for non-white complexions that are used to train these AI applications are trained on. Now, the story continues. This is an article that dates back to 2022, because she didn't take this message for an answer. She partnered up with an NGO, a digital rights NGO in Amsterdam, and they brought the university to court, actually in front of the College for Human Rights, which is a sort of human rights independent body. And they actually, so the judges there ruled that indeed there had been a discrimination case and that he was arrested on the university to prove otherwise. It went on to the court, and the problem is that actually the university won. And the university did not win because there was no discrimination, but because they were able to prove that discrimination was not against this specific student, but it was in general against people who are not white. So they got away with it. So at the end of the story is a bit sad, but at least this contributed big time to put the issue of errors in AI application on the map. This is not the only case on an issue of algorithmic governance. So I find it quite interesting that you have a governance that will step down. Although the story, I'm really cutting the long story short, and there were, it was also a kind of ad hoc move that the government did then. But that's to say, these things are more and more in the media, more and more part of public conversation. I think this is fantastic development, besides the drama of the individuals that suffer and the groups that suffer discrimination. Now, I consider proctoring software, digital identity systems, facial recognition cameras, and also contact tracing apps, for example, but also thermal cameras that you see a picture here, as what I call regulatory data infrastructure. It's a fairly generic term. I just put it together because I want to look at data infrastructures, so data that generate, that generate data in real time, often without human intervention, without human in the loop, and then this data is used for monitoring the population, monitoring access to the public sphere, monitoring belonging to a group, and so on and so forth. But also this data is used to inform in real-time decision-making. So there are data infrastructure that perform regulatory functions, while also informing public policy with the data they produce. And they take up functions that were once performed almost exclusively by humans in the framework of public administration of state entities. Now, this is not necessarily new, but I contend that with the pandemic, we have seen an acceleration of the take-up of these infrastructures, often, and I'm going to say that in a minute, in a context which is, to say the least, undemocratic and definitely non-transparent. So this is also the topic, the core idea behind my would-be research project. That's why I said there's a mix of stuff that I've done, but also things that I would like to do in the future. Now, why should we worry about this type of technology? Now, you've heard me mentioning, for example, digital identity technology. I don't know whether you have it in Switzerland, a digital ID system. We have it in Italy, where I come from. We have it in the Netherlands, where I live. And it's needed to do pretty much anything. I mean, to go to the hospital, to pay taxes, to access your grades at university. So it's really facilitates our life. Let's not, underscore completely, ignore completely the fact that these technologies are often intended, and there's best intention sometimes in this, to really help us to go by in our daily interactions, for example, with the state or with the public space. But nonetheless, there are some reasons to worry. And I mostly deal with the worries in my research. Why should we worry? I listed at least 7 reasons. The first is that a lot of this adoption, this technology, happens outside democratic scrutiny. Think, for example, about contact tracing applications with limited exceptions, including the Netherlands, where there was a debate in Parliament. They were just adopted without asking citizens whether they agree or not. Now, of course, this was a special situation with decisions had to be taken in a hurry. So understandably, maybe you cannot have a referendum like you have here often in Switzerland. But nonetheless, a lot of these developments and adoption and implementation are deliberately left out of citizens' purview because the assumption is that, well, citizens are really a bit ignorant when it comes about technical issues, so let's decide ourselves. As it turns out, and as Philip's work in the past have exposed with facial recognition technology in Como, often also policymakers do not know. But that's another story altogether. The second reason to worry is that with the adoption of technology that is developed by the private sector, by large and far, the state opens the door to for-profit contractors. There might be nothing wrong with that because technology that comes from the industry is often better than technology that comes from the state. And the state in general has no capacity. I mean, it's not the Google, right? To be able to produce quickly technology that works fine, that looks beautiful, that people actually want to adopt. But nonetheless, this means that, for example, our health data, in the moment in which they're private providers, all of a sudden are transferred into the hands of big data providers. And the operators, for example, of data centers. And you have to have very strict rules there. But, it can go wrong very easily. The third point to worry is that all of this happens in a gray social-legal area. So we do have more and more legislation that intervenes in regulating, for example, AI applications. Think about the recent European Union AI Act. But there's a lot of work to do, and in general, of course, legislation is trying to leapfrog behind, technological development and innovation, and often the industry anyway frowns upon regulation because it curbs innovation, supposedly. There is, and that's my fourth point, high potential for discrimination. I guess that there's no need to explore this further. You have seen also in the story from the Dutch university. But it's also increasingly difficult to opt out. I mean, a lot of school systems for kids that are a bit bigger than this one adopted Google Classroom the first day the pandemic kicked in. And then your choice you had was either to send kids to school, which are normally, legally obliged to do, or to keep them home because we don't like Google, right? Sorry, I pick on Google because it's simply easy. But, there's many other examples. So it's increasingly difficult to say, I have nothing to do with this. Sixth reason to worry about is the climate footprint. Often these technologies are presented to us as green. I mean, they're functional, yes, but they are really electricity hungry, and the data center water and electricity consumption is skyrocketing. And there's some very weird projections that by 2027, 1/5 of the world electricity will be consumed by data centers. And while there are countries like the Netherlands or the city of Amsterdam that said, we do not want more data centers in our land because we are rich enough, we also have a lot of water, but we don't want them because they really take up too much electricity, then Facebook, you know what Facebook did? Went to Andalusia, where the state is a bit less strong, or the region is more poor, so they were more interested in the influx of business that this brings about, but where, if you know where Andalusia is, there's far less water than there is in Amsterdam, for example. So there's also a systemic perspective here that we should take into account. And finally, the more we have these technologies into our stack, into our habits, the more they become normalized, and we ask less and less questions about them. And we accept that simply our privacy and our data are given up in, to make space for efficiency and, a smooth life. Now, one of the reasons that I worry about is what, not I, but many people have called techno-solutionism. So the fact that essentially there is a tendency, which we have seen in the pandemic big time, but that, perdures and was actually predated the pandemic, to solve social problems through technology. So to solve complex societal issues that have cultural, economic, and whatever dimensions through an app, right? Through a measure which is, through software and through some device of some sort. As I said, this might indeed facilitate a lot of our interactions and the interaction with the state, but these are some problems. Well, first of all, by introducing the techno into the societal problem, we simply dismiss the complexity of the society, right? And one of the ways in which we dismiss it is by optimizing technology design for the standard human. The notion of the standard human is a popular notion in sociology. I'm a sociologist, so I was greatly inspired in this by the work of Stephen Epstein. Stephen Epstein actually doesn't really work on technology per se, at least not the last time I talked to him, but he is a health sociologist from the US. And in the 80s and 90s, he wrote extensively, including a fantastic book that I encourage you to have a look at, on how pharmaceutical research in the HIV/AIDS drug production actively optimize drug production, therefore the possibility of survival of certain sectors of the population with the virus, right? When the virus was much more scary than it is today, precisely because of the lack of drugs, for certain sector of the population only. You might remember a movie a few years ago called Milk. There was Sean Penn. That was exactly the story that Stephen Epstein was writing about. So essentially a group of LGBTQ plus individuals who, because they were excluded from pharmaceutical trials in virtue of their non-standard, according to the pharmaceutical industry of that time, sexual behavior, because they would engage in, mixed sexual intercourse, let's say. And when you do experiments, you want to control as many variables as possible, right? Which is the reason why, for example, women are often less popular, less used in drug trials, testing. Medications, because women menstruate, and there is a fluctuation in hormones that might, interfere with the effects of a medication. If you're starting the effects, you want to be sure that, this is science, right? You want to make sure that you control as many variables as possible. So you keep the standard subject. The problem is that when you keep the standard subject, you exclude many others. And in the case of HIV/AIDS, the problem was that these people actually were at risk of death because they were excluded. And that's why they got organized. But also the problem of the standard human, or optimizing technology in this case, for the standard human, means that you take that standard human as a sit-in, as a representation, as a proxy for the rest of humanity. But as you know very well, we're not standard. Humanity is not standard. So I'll give you an example from the pandemic. In Germany, the Luca app, which was the app that you probably know about it was used for contact tracing. But the first iteration of the app was designed only for state-of-the-art smartphones. So you had to add, the last 2 models or something of iPhones and Samsung, and the other, whatever it's called, phone, if you were to use the app, if you wanted to install the app. This is a banal thing, but this proves that we bring into technology design ourselves and our perspective. So we can assume that these designers thought that everyone, of course, has the state-of-the-art last smartphone, because that's what you do if you're cool, right? So this excluded a good chunk of the population, let alone, of course, the people who are not digitally literate and so on and so forth, but that's another story. So this is the problem that Stephen Epstein highlighted about pharmaceutical that I have sort of translated into looking at technology during the pandemic and a bit beyond. But there's another problem that goes along with this type of approach, techno-solutionism. So we tend to legitimize inequality and exclusion. Why is that? Because not only is technology designed for certain segments of the population only, forgetting that there's many more and much more diversity, but also, and this is a known phenomenon and widely studied in cognitive sciences, we as individuals tend to trust a computer, a machine that makes decisions, much more than we trust our fellow humans. And the problem is that, think about what I said earlier about the grey social legal area. So if there's no real possibilities of interrogating the software, then we simply know, because there's no yet a system so that you can tell the algorithm, hey, you made a wrong determination about me, I'm not the person you think I am, and stuff like that, then most likely this results in perduring inequality and exclusion, and in the even further dispossession of those that are already on the losing end of the equation. And another problem that gets along, that comes with this, is what myself and a colleague of mine called Emiliano Trerè, also a very good friend of this crowd, who works at Cardiff University, have called data poverty. What's data poverty? Well, we tend to think that privacy is a very important human right. And fair enough, it is, right? Data protection is something that we really feel strongly. Data is my data, and la la la. But, so the attempt, my world view will say, well, I try to give to the state as little data as possible. I try to give the private sector as little. There is a very, actually the biggest digital identity system in the world. It is based on biometric data. So you can either be part of the system, or say, no, I care really about my, we can say more about that, or I can really care about my privacy, sorry state, you cannot have my data. But as it happens, with our Western brain, we will think this is really super bad, right? And it is. We should really be, also India only recently adopted a data protection legislation, right? So until very recently, there was nothing. So right, of course, in this gray area, gray legal area, then of course we have a problem. We are right at raising concerns. But that very same system that gave me shivers the first time I got to know it is the system that allows a lot of poor people who would not otherwise have access to a bank account, because they're not profitable for the banking system, to receive direct payments, direct money transfer from the state. So to be able to put food on the table for their children. So I went all the way to India just to exemplify what we mean by data poverty. The data poverty refers to two phenomena on the list. One is the phenomenon in which, as poor, and it's a broad category, right? But I don't have much time to go into this. But as vulnerable people and vulnerable countries, you do not have the capacity to produce data. During the pandemic, for example, you probably remember this map of John Hopkins University that charted the amounts of COVID cases, right? So you had a big ball, ball if there were a lot of COVID cases, smaller ball if there's less cases. Now, as it happens, at the beginning, Africa reported no cases. You know why? In March 2020, so the very beginning of the pandemic, only 2 out of 54 countries in Africa had the ability to test for COVID. So no COVID cases because there was no ability to generate data. But the lack of data means also lack of empathy, right? Remember that everyone cared at the beginning about Italy because there was so much media production about Italy. So everyone felt strongly about what was happening there because this pandemic coming to us home in Europe. If you have no data, then you also have no empathy, no aid. So in Africa, actually, ultimately got very few vaccinations, right, made available. And you also have less ability to care in general. By the way, in Italy, there's also spiral out of control with a number of racist positions being taken by people that it made the media, so there must have been more than 2 people that claimed that Africans are immune to COVID. And because in Italy there's quite strong backlash against immigration from Northern Africa in particular, this resulted in racist statements in the media, which are absolutely shocking. So this is data poverty in one version. There's also the data poverty, meaning sometimes data, like being invisible to the state, is actually a luxury. And that speaks more to the case of India, right? So this is what we mean, but there's also a little article I can point you to the notion of data poverty developed by myself and Emilia Notrede, thinking about standard humans, the global south, and the various souths in the plural, the various instances of dispossessions and poverty that exist also within rich societies. But now, I've recently been told that my research is depressive. And that's true, actually. So I have made a point in trying, summer, and you're invited to such a beautiful place. I decided that I try to take a little bit of the positive twist and trying to think a little bit about not only we are doomed, we are, by the way, that's actually what I ultimately think, but what can we carve out as small spaces of autonomy, as instances in which we can actually do something as citizenry, as organized civil society, as academics, where we can still have a say and ideally change things a little bit for the better. I actually realized that I didn't explain. I was supposed to start from that, sorry, but I was distracted by, it's all our fault. You noticed that my talk was entitled Beta Testing Democracy. So since 2015, I've been doing a lot of interviews with people that deal with data and data infrastructure, more recently, of course, AI. A lot of them are activists, they're advocates for digital rights, and they're really trying to change society for the better, encountering all sorts of obstacles. But they are those that fight against technical solutionisms, but they also try, through art, through research, through advocacy, through activism, to create the alternative futures that I want to gesture towards. Although I should, I try to be optimistic, but I have no magic band, so I really have no alternative futures in mind, no solution, in fact. So the limit of my optimism are pretty real. But I want to mention these activists that said, talking about this techno-solutionism, and we're talking in particular about Facebook digital identity, but also some other moves that Facebook is doing. They said literally, all these companies and the states that adopt them are in the business of beta testing democracy. Is anyone familiar with what is beta testing in computing? But I don't see everyone nodding, so I mentioned it very briefly. So beta testing is a phase in the development of a piece of technology, can be a software, where you know that the technology is not yet ready for the market, it's not yet optimized. Maybe it's almost there, but you want to have real users. So what do? You inject it into the market, or you inject it into the segment of the population, and see what happens. And if it doesn't work, if it crashes, if it produces unintended outcomes, then you can always withdraw it or correct it along the way. A lot of the beta testing that happens, for example, in algorithmic systems today is totally invisible to us, because it's not a piece of technology like if you say, if you want this, where I have to physically give it to you and then take it back if it doesn't work. But it's very possible to, on the back end, change algorithms on the fly and see what happens. And Facebook, for example, is known to do that, but pretty much anyone. I'm just referring to Facebook because that's where the conversation with my activists starting from. And they say, listen, they are not just beta testing software. They are beta testing our democracy. They are trying to see what are the limits of citizens, what are the limits of what is legal and allowed and normalized today. Until when can we go before democracy breaks down? And, I often learn a lot from activists, and I found this quote this notion of beta testing democracy extremely powerful to really picture the moment we are in, which is a particularly scary moment. A moment of fantastic technological development, rapid, powerful, beautiful. So there's a lot to rejoice about. I also, I'm a heavy technology user. I'm not a ludist at all. But a moment in which democracy is also the turning point. It's about either we really give up in terms of democratic safeguards, human rights, privacy and data protection being the most obvious, but not only, also the right to assembly, the right to political opinion, the right of association, so on and so forth, anti-discrimination, all of that. Or, we are going to get the way of the large companies that are simply doing what they do best, which is making profit from technology development and deployment. What they're doing for the most part is is legal, but is it desirable? So that's my question, right? They're not necessarily breaking the legislation. Well, they are sometimes, because they break it. We actually, in the past, had a beautiful project, also funded by the ERC, but that was a smaller ERC, so the third, that allowed us to develop software to see how the Facebook algorithms work. Because we know very little about that. And we actually realized through our software that what Facebook declares is very different from what Facebook does in terms of, and Amazon as well, and a number of other actually platforms. And we compiled on the basis of our data a report that we brought to the European Union Data Protection, the Ombudsman, whatever it's called, office or something, I've forgotten the name of. But so we have actually evidence that not everything companies do is legal, but it is in the realm of the acceptable. But my point is this desirable? And I think it is the time for citizenry as a whole to really reflect carefully on what is the desirable future. What is it that we want as a society from all this? And where are our boundaries? And where should we not really negotiate and not accept what someone wants us to do? But so with this in mind, I want to try to be now positive. By the way, I have no sense of time because I have no watch. So, okay. Trying to see what needs to be done. Now, I mentioned at the beginning, I'm not sure that you're going to hear anything new from me, so apologies in advance already, because this is kind of fairly obvious, solutions, but they are the ones that we have. And I'm going to have 5 years looking forward with a fantastic team of 7 people to come up with new solutions. But for now, these are the ones that I have in mind. So how can we safeguard democracy amidst the advancement of AI or regulatory data infrastructure? All of this, for me, is pretty much synonymous. I adopt different types of language according to what I want to highlight. And of course, AI is ultimately a marketing term, right? We know that. So sometimes it's also good to step back a little bit from that, because AI is pretty much everything and nothing at the same time. In any case, what needs to be done? We have 3 main instruments as a society, and I'm talking about democracies here for a reason, because democracies are the society that upholds the highest safeguards when it comes to human rights and civic rights. So we have 3 main instruments: a robust regulatory framework, of which we have some examples of, but still in the making; ethical guidelines, which, however, are often fall into the realm of self-regulation, and therefore they have no teeth, right? They only go that far. And there's a lot of ethics washing as well that essentially hides behind, what used to be called greenwashing. Now it's called ethics washing, right? Superficial measures and superficial discussion and interventions, what really is at stake in technology development. And of course, the last session is public awareness, which is, I would like to think, what we are doing here today, what most of you do much better than I do already. So now, what do these instruments have in common? Of course, I ask AI. And I ask ChatGPT actually to define for me what these instruments that I mentioned have in common. So the answer I created it is not that ChatGPT gave it to me, but then I asked for the definition. So what these 3 have in common? It's back here. And a public awareness, what they share is they're wired on public values. I use the notion of public values not at random, but because I have some funding from the Dutch Research Council. We work on standard setting, so the very deep stack of technology regulation where the rules are really set for technology design. We work on 5G and digital identity and cybersecurity. But the funding stream was called co-designing for public values. It was called actually responsible innovation, co-designing for public values. Now, because I'm a good academic when it comes to following the rules to apply for grants, I did my homework and I was trying, before I applied for the grant, to figure out, okay, what do you mean really by public values? And this started a discussion that was the weirdest for me, because no one could actually define public values. In the end, they settled on Dutch values, at which I went like, okay, I'm Italian, I've been living here for over a decade, but what exactly do you mean by Dutch values? So my translation was human rights. But still, there is quite some frequent evoking of public values in technology design. So I decided to also go with that. And actually, we recently released in February a very enlightening, for me, statistical survey of the Dutch population. We reached out for about 3,000 individuals, thanks to a polling company, to ask exactly what Dutch citizens think about public values and technologies. And we had the weirdest findings. And I have to pick the Dutch simply because I live there and because it was Dutch funding. But I hope to reproduce this also elsewhere in other countries, because it's very interesting to actually see what normal people, right, not necessarily informed people, think about this and how relate to this, and how they also make, for example, consumer choices about this. And so public values, ChatGPT, clearly the expert of the future, tells me that there are principles, ideals, and norms that are collectively held, although we might not know exactly what they are, by members of a society and considered to be important for the public good or common welfare. And I like the fact that there is an emphasis, even ChatGPT knows that there is something collective and common. So something that binds us all as a society. Examples of public values are democracy, justice, equality, freedom, transparency, accountability, sustainability, and the protection of human rights and the environment. So it's a pretty extensive definition. So what can we do to take this home? So with this in mind, wiring public values, and public values I discovered in policy setting that sometimes it works better than talking about human rights, because human rights are enshrined in national constitution for the most part. Still, there's a lot of people who are afraid of human rights. And is perceived to be too much of an activist term, although it's the best we have. I mean, in governance, it works very well. In governance of the internet, for example, because you can say no to human rights, but sometimes it's a conversation stopper in a way. But with this in mind anyway, so public values, human rights, however you want to call them, public values seems to work a little better. That's what I think we can do. I mean, and Veronica already mentioned the pluriverse. The pluriverse has to do with the work actually comes from Zapatista, the Zapatista cosmovision. The Zapatistas, for those who are not familiar with it, is an uprising. They started, well, public in the 90s, but it was there before, amongst a certain indigenous group in Chiapas, so in the rural southern part of Mexico. And they did very fantastic work over time, also using the internet. That's another story. But more recently, there's been a fantastic scholar, an anthropologist who you might know, Arturo Escobar, who really inspired by the Zapatistas, wrote a great book, actually more than one, but my favorite is called Design for the Pluriverse, or Designing for the Pluriverse. And really tries to apply design thinking to thinking society, and for me it was a great inspiration to think technology and technology deployment in society, adopting a vision of the world which is not a universe as one, right? But it's plural. It's what I was criticizing about and tried to head to earlier when I said if we design technology for the standard human, we dismiss a large part of the population that doesn't fit in the standard. So if you follow the line of reasoning of Arturo Escobar, then we should really encourage to embrace also this plurality of views, preferences, and values, and living situations and conditions. Now, that I understand is a bit of a philosophical message that might go down well with some people, might work less well with others. Nonetheless, I find it as a very, very good foundation for the other practical, more practical actions I listed here on the slide. Okay, so we have 4 then more practical action. The first is what we do also in universities. We try to contribute to education, but the one that I have in mind is actually much more at the public level. So not only for the lucky people that are indeed lucky enough to be able to receive a university education, but also try to spread out to society. And that's why I really like that we are in an open public building. That's what I understand. Somewhere where the university is supposed to encounter the public. But we should really invest and do much more of that. We should also start actually from the very, very early age. Maybe not this early, but immediately afterwards. I mean, she's totally digitally illiterate for decision because she doesn't get to touch screens. But, in the moment in which kids get to primary school, it might even already be too late for some of them. But it's very, very important to add to the normal, regular education also how do you become a digital citizen, because that intercepts anything from very practical problems of cyberbullying to actually being the citizens in the digital society of the present/future. So also having people that are able to make decisions when they come to vote for a referendum here in Switzerland or for any other decision of that kind. The second is participation in AI governance. There's actually, believe it or not, a lot of possibilities for citizens, more or less experts, to also participate in the way the technology is in itself designed and governed. And by that I mean, for example, when it comes to technology standards, which is a bit boring to say, but extremely important because technology standards is really what design what we can do and not do. And those are actually public fora. You can go there. You can go there, you can have a say. Because they are designed to be multi-stakeholder fora, where citizens are on the equal footing to the industry and the public sector. Now, as we know, this equal footing is a bit of wishful thinking, because there's a problem with resources, whereby citizens are not as resourced as the rest of the actors, especially the industry, but nonetheless the possibility is there. So I encourage you to go and look for these opportunities or come and ask me, and I have some suggestions. Monitoring and oversight. That's also something that we can do as citizens. Now, of course, there's fantastic NGOs and non-governmental organizations that do that very, very well. But nonetheless, we can also keep our eyes open and demand clarification at the level of both technology providers and the government. I mean, ask, for example, to see where your data for the health sector end up. The more of us who ask, the more they're going to be forced to make things public, because then they become annoying, and therefore at least some transparency might come as a result. And finally, ethical consumption. I mean, it was very popular in the 90s about fair trade and trying to get coffee, which is not a result of exploitation, where we can do exactly the same with technology. We can say no. And we can say no also as organized citizens. We can say no to, for example, selling our data, our health and education data to, dubious private actors that may not do with them what we like them to do. Okay, so I guess I'll leave it at that, because this is getting a little heavy. But thank you very much, and I have to say apologies again. We have to leave shortly, but it has been a pleasure to at least get to know some of you and to be continued. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stefania.
Some of the sources that I quoted, but
no, that's cool. No, it was actually very interesting how you tied in a lot of the debates that we were talking about today. Today we talked about testing and the fact that most of the technologies that we are developing are pushed into society without a prior real trial or a prior care for democracy, for citizenship, for people, and so on. We talked about the standard human, why, you know, why it could be problematic. And what I kind of would like now the debate to or in the questions, one of the questions that I have as well, thinking about these topics, is that unfortunately for technological design, the real problem is that we need standards. And for design in general, we need standards. You can't create an airplane without a standard seat, because otherwise how do you, and then you can, everything is connected to the standard. So the standard human really defines the way in which we structure our society, the way in which we structure our technologies. It's always there, but it comes with so many severe implications. So I know that there's many of you from that actually work more at the intersection of innovation rather than less in civil society. And I think we do have a space here for questions and thoughts about these topics. So really, are we testing our democracies, and how does a care for our democracy how can it live with the care for other things like creative technology design and moving forward or addressing society? So questions and thoughts. No questions? I can't believe it. Question. There is no question, so no. But if you have a question, it's more reflections about trying to connect to what we were talking about this morning, to what's been said, but also the challenge of doing technologies whilst maintaining a pluriverse and maintaining a more ethical approach that is not ethics washing. So that was kind of the question too. I know it's a bit of a challenge, but
it's a big area. Yeah. I think. So myself, I build things, so I don't study them that well. But even though I'm a male, white, and all of that, I never felt very standard. So I think that's kind of, you know, when you receive that kind of form, fill in who you are, and I never felt I fitted into anyone, even though I looked very normal. So I think that's, you know, it's been going on. So what I was saying by that is that has been in our society for a long time, because this is come from imperialism, you know, how we wanted to form and shape, standardize us as human beings in the eyes of the one who kind of controlled or had the means to control the state or society. So it's been there for a long time. And of course, you know, so the other side of the coin is the kind of, or the other point of view is from the solutionists in Silicon Valley is always, well, you know, we are here actually challenging what used to be there, and we are making it more plural, because that's what we are working towards. And look at us, all the employees in Google have all the colors of the world and all the sizes. But of course, the problem there is that they all come from the same institutions, and it's a societal infrastructure, or where they come sit in its hero society, which is a problem. But I mean, so there are a couple of things that happened before we arrived here, and I think for me, what I really cared about now, still care a lot about, but 10 years back, was what I always called that intelligence, as a human intelligence, has become artificial. And what I mean by that is that we have already kind of made society so dependent upon circus, and we have stopped thinking ourselves, because it's so easy to, when you're bored, you just flick your phone. But that it's very hard to create this public awareness because they're more busy with their Instagram or being entertained. I mean, look at entertainment. Entertainment is, the good old circus and bread for the public, right? I mean, it's dominant society so greatly that just think of commonsensical approach to a problem, that it's lost. They have to search Google to find out how to do something that anyone should be knowing how to do. So I think these are kind of areas. But of course, regulation. And again, here we have the problem where it's very anti-capitalism or anti-development to go in and demand regulation. But I can tell you that no industry until now could work without regulation. Everything has been regulated. I mean, who wants their house to run on electricity-powered systems without regulation? No one. So how could we accept this when it comes to data? Yes, because it was this utopian, non-national dream where anyone is Wild West and everyone can do what they like. But the truth is that, if you're head of a state, it's your state, and you can create walls around them as according to the values that you believe are important. So which are those values? And I agree, for me, privacy is kind of the poster child of what I do, and that's what I truly believe is something that we need to bring back. I really believe that we or governments have been so tame on taking a position because it's been feeling that it's been so contra development for the good. But I think one of the positives I see now is that, when technology matures, we are not so easily seduced by the technology. So, you see that with the smartphones or whatever application. Now you can have an application for anything, but now you've seen anything, but if there's nothing novel, you start to look what's behind, what is the effect of all of these things I have adapted. So that, I think, is an aspect of positive thinking, that you immediately get, more critical about what is around you. Whether you're an academic or a bus driver, you start saying, well, I take it for granted. But then the topic of what I've learned, about privacy is that it's so malleable. What you believe, what is really privacy and why it is important. But as long as you get the whatever, watch football on your handset for free, you're willing to, not care so much about your privacy. And so we have a very kind of strong issue there, and we can't leave it to each individual to make that decision, because it is in that element of an absolute, do I go left or right? 99% of people take the free. They were not willing to pay because they're willing to, it is that moment. That's the function of a government. That is what the government is supposed to do.
Well, it's very interesting. Sorry, can you just... No, Peter, wait. Keep the microphone, keep it there. Can I ask you to introduce yourself? So because actually now, whenever the microphone... let's introduce ourselves so we can actually contextualize who's asking for regulation.
So clearly not a normal human being or a standard human being. My name is Peter. I'm not Italian. There are a lot of Italians here, but I do live in Italy. I founded a company called Punkt, which is a Swiss consumer electronics company, in 2008. And I started just wanting to protect the bedroom. I only wanted a beautiful alarm clock that only do one thing. It wakes you up earlier than that you naturally do. There's no other technology you need in your bedroom. So that's how we started at that time. And then I launched what we call a digital minimalist phone in 2015. And at that time, I would say 9 out of 10 had no clue why the hell should I buy such a phone. We launched a second version of that in 2018. I would say 9 out of 10 understood why one would have such a phone. And fast forward to this year, we launched the third mobile operating system. And we launched that in Las Vegas in January. And it's an open source, fully transparent. And it's actually the only alternative to Google and Apple.
I wanted to let him introduce himself also because my husband has a Punkt phone. Okay. And we are currently thinking about giving it to our daughter because she really is in the phase in which she wants an iPhone and we don't want to give her. So it's
that's too quick of a solution. Yes, I would never recommend to give a teenager a Punkt phone.
No.
before she wants one herself.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Right? But for Germans or German-speaking, I think it's beautiful because they call what I call a digital minimalist phone, they call it the weekend phone. At least it's very common, certainly in Germany. And I think that because there is still here on the continent a strong sense of division between private life and work life, which, you know, in Anglo-Saxon hemisphere doesn't exist, right? So, yeah, sorry.
Well, thank you. Do you want to respond to that, or have you got reflections? No. You're right. Okay. Any other thoughts? Yes, Marie.
Well, you all know who I am now, no? I mean, I'm in the Human Error Project with Veronica, and I have maybe a naive question. Is it also possible to advocate for opting for non-technological, I don't know, policies, programs? Because there is so much issues coming from the fact that it's technological, and I never hear of saying maybe we could go for alternatives that are not technological.
Sorry. Is this? Hello. Okay. Just to introduce, again, I'm going for the introduction today. Marie is finishing her PhD this year, and she's been working on the intersection between technology and age. And it's quite interesting. She said the question, like in her research, she worked with people over 70, yeah, pretty much. And one of the big question was, at a certain point, this is a little piece of, it was this elderly people saying, but why all this technology? You know, we went to the moon and back, and then, well, you know, what are we doing? And imagine, especially with that age, they've seen the greatest technological transformations, from the washing machine to the, you know, like, so it's quite fascinating. Anyway, this was just a short, proud moment as a supervisor.
Congratulations to both the student and the supervisor. Sounds very interesting and also extremely urgent. So if I can just comment very briefly to that, yes, there's more and more pushback, but it's extremely hard. So we should probably start ourselves from our own little practices. By little practices, I mean, do we organize an event? Let's also give the possibility, I'm not criticizing, I never do that, but I will start, to give the possibility to people to also register in another manner, which is not maybe digital, right? I can tell you that a colleague of mine doesn't have a smartphone. This means that he cannot grade his students. He can, in principle, right? He cannot authenticate himself into anything. So he cannot have, we use a system which is actually in-house bred. So it's just something developed in part by the university, customized by the University of Amsterdam, called Canvas. And but that's the interface that we have to use to also write to students. You cannot write them, in principle, an email directly, for example. So he writes mails and all of that, but he doesn't have the smartphone for the authentication to the system. And then it drove the university nuts until they literally developed a system so that he can have a pen drive, so he can authenticate himself through a pen drive, But so that said, it is possible. It is also possible that us ourselves try always to think about what could be alternative ways of interacting in a certain whatever we are doing, to make sure that also people that prefer not to, or simply are not able to, or can't for whatever reason, still interact with us, or do, they enjoy whatever we're doing in a way that is still accessible. But yeah, there is a lot of work to do. And I find, for example, the fact that universities, we use exclusively Microsoft, and you cannot get away from that. It should also come from us as critical thinkers within the university to, start questioning alternative ways of dealing, having basically social relations, because teaching and grading is, something that we do between people anyway. So why do we need necessarily all of that? So it's a very, very good point. There's a lot of work to do, though.
Okay, so I introduce myself. It seems to be part rule of the game, right?
Yes.
So I'm Federico. I'm Professor of Environmental Humanities here at ISK. I'm from Italy, Italian. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. Anyway, and I do work particularly around decolonial topics, and I do also collaborate a lot with Arturo Escobar. So when I heard about the pluriverse, I was particularly enthusiastic. Thanks for bringing that in. And I have a question related to that. When Arturo Escobar and other decolonial thinkers deal with the topic of technology, something they do is to advocate for a pluriversal approach to technology itself. People such as Yukui with cosmotechnics, for example, they have this idea of trying to not to become anti-technological, but to rethink technology from within. And also from, speaking of the pluriverse, reconfiguring the relation, taking into account that there are different ways of conceiving technologies around the planet and also different relation between humans and non-humans. So technology seems to be at the interface of human and non-human, right, ways of being. So there's a lot to work around that. So my question for you is that, do you envision the possibility of a pluriversal approach to AI, for instance, in which there isn't just AI as defined by the big tech from the US, basically, but there are other approaches to AI or to digital technology in particular that may help us go in that direction. So move beyond this dichotomy between either anti-technologism or we are doomed because the big tech from the US or whatever, the big player will just create this monstrous system. So do you think a pluriversal approach to technology itself and to AI could work? Is there any instance of that happening? One example that, for instance, that of conversation that I heard about this topic is what is happening to agricultural production around the planet, right? Because, we take for granted here in the West that somehow we are already part of cyber-physical system in which everything is already being datified and so on. But as Bill and Melinda Gates know that's not true for agriculture, for relation in the global south in agrarian society. And so through smart agriculture, they are trying actually to tap in this few billion people way of life and technologize that in a way which is quite scary. So coming up with another vision of the role of technology within agriculture in the global south and not just in an urban Western context could be another point of leverage in rethinking pluriversal technology. I don't know. It's just a...
Can I tap in 1 second? Quick. Just so this is not full promotion of the Machines That Fail Us, but our latest podcast from the Machines That Fail Us is from Payala Aurora, and she's been working for many, many years on inclusive AI cultures. And she's an anthropologist, and she's very interesting, very good. Stefania knows her, so just kind of is well known. And another second thing that it's actually a question that I'm tying into is in anthropology there is very much at the moment anthropologists working on technology, there is very much the question of whether we will have the automated futures that we think, or whether those futures are going to be negotiated piece by piece between humans and the technology. A bit like when we said, there's not going to be any more books because there's the digital, and then so I was wondering what those relations.
So just in case, the Machines That Fail Us podcast is available on the university's website, and here is the episode with Payala Aurora. Sorry.
Yeah, I can only recommend
self-promotion. Yes, it is what it is. Yes.
I love that podcast, by the way. Congratulations on thinking about that, because that's part of our, I think, mission as academics to also reach out, in the way, and helping a little bit, contributing to literacy. So I think it's very important. And Payal is absolutely fantastic. So yes, I think there is space for different perspectives on technology. And I think that our role as academics is to be troublemakers and to ask questions and to instill doubt. Now, that said, can you actually develop technology that is really fully That's a question. And I think we should also invest into experimenting with that. So getting our hands dirty with technology development itself, maybe with companies that we share some values with. I give you an example. We wanted to know whether, so we always say human rights we were doing something on internet governance back in Amsterdam, and we were trying to convince the ICANN, the Internet Corporation of Assigned Names and Numbers, that does some part of technical governance of the internet, to adopt the human rights bylaw, which we were successful to do through one of my PhD students, Niels Tanouwer, that I highly recommend, by the way. He's doing fantastic work. A little bit of, well, we have to nurture the next generations. So, but then what we did was also to see whether, can you actually run a mail server? So, going back to the basics, like email, we still perceive it as fairly innocent. Can we actually run a mail server which is fully compliant with human rights? And the answer is no. So it's yes to some extent. So what I want to say is that there should also be space, and within university we should make space for this type of experimentation, because otherwise the result is that we are going to work alongside principles, and principles are important. Revolutions are made by ideas, right? But nonetheless, it's also good to experiment, I find. And so that's also what we try to do in our little space of experimentation in Amsterdam. I'm going to have an entire lab in the next 5 years to play with this, involving also artists and whatnot, just to try to make it also accessible, the result of the experimentation. And then, so other things that briefly, like your question, made me think about. There's actually a lot of a lot of activists across the world who have been experimenting with creating their own technology. And for some reason, let's go back again to Mexico, and there is a Rhizomatica, an organization in southern Mexico, in a rural part of Mexico, where basically it's so spread out, mountainous, and people are essentially poor, that the large providers of electronic phone, basically, communications, don't have any interest in putting antennas. So what they did, they created their own cell phone network. And this is a fantastic, very powerful example. So there's plenty of these where people across the world, just tap on that because for some reason I just mentioned the Zapatistas and it's connected, but that have been experimented for decades. From the early days of radio, right? And fanzines that were photocopied and stuff. So people have been trying to subvert technology. The problem that we have is that the complexity of the technology that we're talking about today makes it virtually impossible for people on the ground to really develop their own things. Some components can be developed, choices can be made, and we should encourage that. But the complexity is so that it makes it extremely difficult and unlikely to really, develop working independent system, from the ground up, in a way. So that's a little bit what I worry about.
Thank you so much. That's great that you just mentioned that the alternatives, also technological alternatives, develop from below, right? My question is going into this direction. I wanted to just especially pick up that question, what can be done, and bring that a bit in conversation with some of the work we're doing. Sorry, I should say I'm Antje. My background is I'm a social movement scholar, and I've done the civil society part of the Human Error Project. Just wanted to bring that question to conversation with some of the things that we found, and also some of the things that I spoke to several people mentioned this morning, and bring a bit the knowledges also from this room. So with regards to what can be done, because one of the things that we found as well in our research is that issue of collective resistance and agency, and also collective mobilization. So, and again, from below. So if kind of regulation comes a bit more from the top, it's like how do people from below respond to some of these issues, and alternative technological tools can definitely be one way. It's also something we found. But I found that one really interesting strand of action was where resistance doesn't derive from technology as the core issue, but it's actually people who are already collectively organized in feminist struggle as workers or as students, and for whom then technology can become a part of their struggle rather than kind of mobilizing people around technology, if that makes sense. Yeah, so that really came out of our research. Is what if we flip that on its head and ask what can be done, starting from the systemic inequalities that we have, that technology perpetuates, rather than starting from the technological inequalities and trying to bring diverse perspectives to it. So I just wondered, if that's something you came across as well, or what your thoughts are on this.
Thank you so much. This is a fantastic question that allows me to think back to my PhD times, which is all fantastic times. Afterwards, right? When you're doing that, maybe it's not that fantastic. But so I also come from social movement studies. And my PhD was actually on trying to figure out how do people mobilize on technical specialized issues like all that you're talking about. Back then it was not AI yet, but like autonomy and data protection, but also autonomy in the technology realm. And I totally agree. It is true that it is so. Also with one of my postdocs, Davide Beraldo, we wrote actually about the distinction between data as stake and data as repertoire. So without really boring you with the details of this, but essentially, so a reflection on all these topics, let's say, as a shortcut, can be either the main reason from which people mobilize, but it's extremely minoritarian. So these would be, human rights advocates. There are many, and they are professional activists. They are fantastic and are doing a great job to defend us as human beings. But still, if you look at the grand, perspective on what people mobilize on, there are very few, right? They're a sort of mini elite of experts, essentially. And the best indeed is to tap on, so using data or anything else like as a repertoire, so whereby people mobilize temporarily on this as well on top of something else, because then it immediately becomes apparent the why, right? The why should I care about privacy? Well, because I'm a feminist organization, or because I am, whatever. And this is part of the values I stand for. And therefore I'm forced by the society to care also about that. So indeed, there is, the good news is that there's a lot moving. The bad news is that it's not enough. We will need much more, many more activists and advocates also reflecting actively on AI, technology, and all of that. The problem is that people feel totally disempowered. And one of I mentioned this survey that we did in the Netherlands. One of the very sad findings, it was very surprising to me, is that the more the people are educated, the more they feel disempowered. And this has to do mostly with young people and women. So people that essentially, because they know more about the technology, paradoxically, or the complexity of the technology, then the least they feel entitled or able to have a say. So, and if these are also often young people, sometimes also women, mostly young people, at the vanguard of social movements, that you can see why there is this disconnection with less and less, with too few people anyway, compared to what we would like to see them mobilize on this. A lot of work to do.
I think, also another question that emerges very well from these debates is the question about public values. How do we define the public values? Who defines public values? And also, this is kind of personal feeling. And that's what we try to go against with the Human Error Project, is that in this conversation, there's often been one side of the story. So we want diversity, then let's put another woman or another on the board. But it's really is that really enough? Is that really how we can think diversity? And we felt that the dialogue was very, very stuck between different areas of society as well. Rafi, you had a question, right? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rafi, a student, not currently working on anything, but open to work if anyone wants to hire, passionate and curious. I need to adjust my question a little bit because it kind of got covered there, but I was thinking when looking at those who were excluded and also leaning on the podcast, how you have the visual recognition for the illiterate to help them. What are other applications that could then help leapfrog those who are excluded in technology to actually then be more involved in actually powering it?
Sorry, Stay, did you get the question? I saw you, she was a bit distracted. I can't repeat it again, Rafi.
She fell asleep. You're so boring. It takes me ages usually.
So I was just thinking, for those who are excluded currently from technology, you had the example of India where they have now participation with the banking. What are other applications that could actually help leapfrog and bring the people who are excluded actually to be included and to actually better their lives there with the technology rather than just...
This is a great question, and probably could crowdsource it, because I have some examples in mind, but there's probably a lot more. I mean, at the end of the day, no matter how much we talk about the pluriverse, we are still very situated, partial human beings. So my perspective is mine and only, So maybe you have other example of that. But in general, I would say technology, that makes people come out of their condition of invisibility towards the state, for example, if you need public subsidies, but also towards society, because empathy is also a very important currency. So if I know a problem, I might care for that problem. If I don't, then it's outside of my sort of purview and interest, and therefore I might not act on it. Then this is probably a set of technologies which is very broad.
No, focus.
Thanks. Then it is probably where the most fruitful technologies are emerging today. At the same time, we should also be very mindful of what we consider good in technology. One of my fantastic research master students right now is writing about Argentina and apps that allow people, who are mostly actually at the moment Venezuelan migrants into Argentina, to work as riders. So to deliver food, right? Something which is a feature of our rich societies, and we often forget what's behind that. And if you think that the system in Europe, I don't know anything about Switzerland actually, but it's fairly bad because they're not, they don't have a proper contract and whatever. Theirs much, much worse. To the point that they receive no payment through the app, but they have to go cash the money from you and then pay. So it's a very complex system that essentially means that often there's scams, there's people that basically have to upfront, they're already very poor, they have to upfront money and stuff like that. So by that, I also want to say that sometimes, so we consider technology inherently bad or weird or convenient to us, but we should also think about how do we make that technology that might be very useful, but also is bad for labor reasons, also more decent from the technological point of view. I'm sure I didn't actually explain it very well, but maybe I'm also ready for a nap. But what I want to say is that we should also question technology that in principle I probably would like to phase out, but considering the situation of extreme dispossession of people that use it and try to make that better as well. If it makes sense, I don't know exactly. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Rahi. I'm also part of the Human Error team. And also I'm doing PhD under Veronica. So my question is actually, I want to go back to the example that you shared about the biometric identification system in India. And I think you mentioned something about being data hidden could be beneficial in case of India when there's surveillance being done through identification systems. But this brings me to my own PhD research because I focus on Dalit communities in India and how the technology, caste, and health intersect with each other and bringing oppressive dynamics towards Dalit sanitation workers. So over there, I don't think necessarily data hidden could be beneficial because in the sanitation sector, I think in 2018, they introduced surveillance technologies to monitor the movement of Dalit workers to see if they're productive or not. So in that case, whether they are into the system or not, whether they are aware of data privacy or technology, or whether they have a biometric identification system, Aadhaar card or not, they are surveillance is being imposed on them, considering them to have mistrusted identities and so on. So it makes me, so this is some thought that came to my mind. And just wanted to share with you and,
again, I'm going to do the proud supervisor again, but it's quite fascinating from RISE research. One of the critical questions that are emerging is how on earth we are developing technologies of control that are super sophisticated, and we cannot develop technologies of care, just the basic care, especially because most of the people that she was interviewing and working with were kind of working with sanitation during COVID in India. So you're talking about where, where is that kind of like, so again, how we're failing in this?
Yeah, so thank you very much for this example. And once again, I would really love to read your PhD thesis whenever you're done. I think it's a very, very important work that you're tapping on there. Yeah, I think this brings me back to this issue of ethical consumption and also, like resistance in general to technology development that is not useful in a way or simply very, very harmful. But here I want to shout out to the work of Virginia Eubanks, that probably a lot of you already know, but if you don't, you should look it up. She works on technology deployment for, against basically poor people in the US. And she has a very simple argument, which I distilled from the book, but is one of the many interesting ones, where she basically says, if you want to understand the future of intrusive technology, do not look at, the lucky ones, in a way, the privileged ones amongst us with the state-of-the-art technology. Look at one of the losing end of society, because that's where technologies of the future are being, beta tested in a way, that tried out, because the expectations that human rights and all the rest is being upheld is at its lowest. And therefore, they can get away with a lot. But if it works there, then we have a great case scenario to also do it elsewhere. So, and incidentally, also these are the people that are the least prone to protest, the least prone to raise awareness. I mean, raise an issue with this. Also because the choice they face is between this or even a worse situation, which is probably unemployment and maybe death, right? So that's why I do believe academia has still a role to play, society also trying to raise a voice in this respect. But indeed, by the way, you're talking about one of the most, dispossessed people on this planet, probably. Unfortunately, there's competition there, there's many. But for example, going to the Netherlands, there has been recently a project on, in a wealthy society like the Netherlands, where there is poverty but is well hidden. But what the plan was around the city of Eindhoven was to design. Well, I can also come up because I find I don't have a baby in my arms, so just I find it odd that I'm talking behind my back. Sorry. But so what they did was in the city of Eindhoven, they are developing an entire neighborhood, basically a mini city where you can live rent-free. Now, everyone wants to live rent-free, especially if you are in an expensive city. Well, we are comparing prices. Also here is extremely expensive. So why not living in rent-free? What do you have to give up in exchange? You have to give up all your data, including sewage data. So what goes out of your toilet and of your, like black waters channels. The University of Amsterdam, my university, is part of the partnership. The idea came from Endemol. I don't know if it rings the bell. It's the producer, the inventor of the Big Brother, right? As a format. So it's like, it cannot be so bad or so ridiculous, so much in your face. Now, luckily, they didn't get enough money, so they're scaling down. But even in this context, without going, as far as India and the Dalits, this is so if the technologies that are tested there are successful, you can bet that next year they are in Amsterdam at my doorstep, right? So that's why we should worry about what is happening to the Dalits. And I'm using the case of the Netherlands because, as we know, I'm a former journalist. It's more impressive if it hits close to home, right? So we might not see the connection next year to the Dalits, but Virginia Eubanks and you clearly are making that very clear for us. So thank you very much.
Yeah. So yes, Julia. Again, introduce yourself. I am.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Lucia. I'm from University of Bern. I'm also a PhD candidate in social anthropology. And in parts of my work, I'm working on policing, in the police, and also implementation of technologies in the police, in the French police. And in one part of my PhD, I'm looking at violence detection algorithms which were implemented. So I have very practical examples, which I'm not going to talk about now. But what I found striking, and this relates also to the question before, is that even if the technology completely fails, often it remains to be desirable, and there will be some actors which will defend the technology, even that not only like from a human rights perspective or data privacy perspective, the system is problematic, but it really fails on the ground in the sense that even the actors themselves, that means the police institution, cannot really use the tool. Or I don't know, like they really cannot use it, and even are being distracted from their work they should do because the system is there. And how can it be? So I ask myself, like, it's an open question, but how can this desire for the technology be so strong? And continue. And I mean, one part is maybe path dependency, of course, but like, are there other explanations to this?
This is a great question that I'm probably going to take back to a colleague of mine who is a behavioral economist, because I do believe that there is something cognitive there that behavioral science can probably tell us. And I don't feel, I'm not a cognitive scientist, so I'm not really able to really go into that question, but I find it extremely important one. So keep asking that. I think, like, I often use the case of Philip's work together with some other colleagues of his as a journalist for what they did in Como with the facial recognition technology. Why is this desire? Why still people do that? And I think you can, I often mention it, but you are much more entitled, given you are in the room, to speak about that yourself now.
Not the only one who was involved, actually, also Luca was part of the... Yeah.
I think that's really groundbreaking piece of work, which I quote all the time, by the way. So maybe you can mention that. But otherwise, what I want to say is that there is a desire on the side of institutions to look much cooler than they are. And this I mentioned just from very anecdotal evidence when I was working as an advisor to the Italian government in a technocratic government, sounds like a million years ago. And in a ministry that is of education, university and research, which is constantly under attack by students, parents, grandparents, teachers, whatever. The partnership with Google was actually something to be proud of, because it makes us look state of the art, cool, basically. So often it's a very human desire to preempt criticism by being part of the conversation in a way. The problem, of course, is that this creates realities. So in the moment in which the technology might fail, but it still might jail some people, it still might stigmatize some others, and then it becomes normalized and part of the stack. And so you have, once you have technology, you can only have more technology. No society is known to go back and have less technology. So this is also something that we should take seriously and try to criticize. But I think you should comment on why do people do that.
Briefly comment. In the case of Como, it was actually the company Huawei producing the hardware, pushing it to the municipalities, saying, "Hey, we know you have budget for your smart city projects. Why don't you buy an illegal facial recognition system and test it on people without letting anybody know?" So that's why the technology is still spreading, probably. I don't want to be the last speakers, but we really have to close down. So I take this very bad kind of commitment on myself to thank, of course, Stefania and Milan for being with us, and also Emma for being with us, of course, and all of you for all your great questions. And I'm saying this also to the people following from the internet. We're now having 15 minutes break with coffees that only us in presence can, of course, enjoy. And then we will back with our panel, at the end of which we will all walk down the hill to our very lovely office for the networking, apero, and the drinks. So I'll see you pretty soon. And Stefania, always great to have you with us. Generally an honor to be your friend. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining this closing session of our event. For the housekeeping, don't run away as soon as the session ends, because there will be a networking apéro, which is a very professional way for saying drinks, that will take place at the MCM Institute down the hill. We will walk down all together once we're done with our event. And I'm saying this, of course, just to make another joke on the drinks, but because it would be nice to have like more informal conversation among all of us. But before that, well, I am Philippe Di Salvo. I'm a member of the Human Error Project team, and I'm very happy to be here moderating this session, which brings together actually 3 people that have been somehow involved with our project, because either they gravitate around the topics that we have been studying, or because they've been actively interviewed by the Human Error Project team together, the knowledge we have been discussing today. So the idea of behind this panel really to bring together the perspective on AI errors and human rights and all the things we've been discussing today, and listen from perspective from the media, from civil society, and also from the business around AI and the tech industry. So I'm very happy to be joined by Luca Zorloni, who is the head of Wired Italia Online, so the digital operation of Wired magazine in Italy. He coordinates the website of Wired in Italy and editorial staff, and he's also an investigative journalist who covers tech and AI as well from different perspectives. And we've been working together also on the project about facial recognition in Como that has been mentioned a few times today. We also have Ilia Siatitsa from Privacy International. She leads the strategic area of the organization that challenges government surveillance overreach. She basically issues government for a living, and many other things. She's been challenging mass surveillance and various projects, or she's leading various projects, Privacy International, around mass surveillance and the protection of civic spaces. I'm very much happy to be joined by Lorna Goulden, who works instead in the tech businesses, although from a very peculiar perspective, and she's digital experience principal at Lumo Labs, and she's also the co-founder of Twinds Foundation, which is developing an open source toolkit that enables developers of mobile or web apps to employ a self-sovereign identity and data privacy framework, which has already been coming back in our conversations today. So from this panel, we will gather views, also responding to Stefania's keynote. And our project has always been informed by this notion of trying to write the history of the present of AI errors, which is a quote that we've been using and misusing a million times in the past few years. It actually comes from Aradao and Blanche, 2 researchers that we've been following for a while. And the idea is to literally look at AI errors as a lens to see the way forward in our future with intelligent machines. So the first thing I would like to ask all of you is kind of gathering your feelings around what Stefania's been sharing with us, especially when it comes to this idea of beta testing, democracy, which kept together a keynote and many of the things we have been discussing. So is, of course, a notion that we can look at from different AI and AI errors in the past few years. What comes to your mind? How do you relate to the issue in your field of work? And I don't know who of you wants to start. Well, you have the mic, so maybe that's a sign.
Okay. So is it working?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yeah, of course, we'll relate it to my perspective. So I'm coming from the industry perspective, the technology development perspective. And of course, that's actually part of the process of developing and launching software. So you have also your software development lifecycle. And one of the first parts is indeed the beta testing. So it's very interesting to actually observe and particularly see with the research that for some reason, this isn't happening in a lot of the cases, not from the point of view, have I checked for errors, have I checked for impact, have I actually also beta tested unintended consequences? And so I love this, beta testing democracy. It's actually beta testing for the human empathy aspect. And also not introducing it as something new, but it's something that actually is established in the development world. So there are tools, there are actually methods and methodologies to do this, but it needs to be recognized and applied in the broader context.
I see.
In order?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. It provided a very nice visual of something we see in our work every day. Data-intensive technologies that of different levels of complexity, autonomy, and abstractions that generate mass amounts of data have been used across the world. And the problem we've seen recurrently is the fact that these technologies then tested or initially deployed, not even tested, on groups or situations that are found in very precarious situations, and that they're in vulnerable positions, that they are not able to challenge the outcome of those results. The first one that comes to mind is the introduction of these technologies in immigration management and border controls. People on the move, whether they are travelers or they are people that they need actually to ask for asylum, or they are refugees. People on the move are found actually being tested on, for instance, lie detectors that will test someone to find out whether, from micro-expressions, whether they're lying or not, whether the language voice system will detect the language they claim they are. And all this is based on assumptions, construed on assumptions we have about the people we receive at the border as well. Similar situations we can see also, for instance, in testing facial recognition technologies at checkpoints in conflict zones. Again, impossible to actually challenge, let us know what we're talking here. And the one thing that I think the visual of beta testing helped as well put into my head is the big difference with these instances I'm just describing is with beta testing, usually there is a procedure in place that we'll start with the beta testing, we check, we correct, we move to the next stage. Well, the check and correct part is completely missing from when we are these technologies are deployed in these contexts. And so that is something that came to mind. Thank you.
First, thank you, Philly. Thank you, Veronica, for the invitation and the opportunity to talk about this topic from the perspective of a journalist. I would split my answer in two parts. The first is how AI is in some way reshaping the model of journalism, so beta testing journalism. We ask a lot of questions about how, for example, Gen AI will replace or steal the work of journalists. I don't think so, but for sure it's asking us to develop new forms of new abilities, new application to different processes to do our reporting, for example, using AI also to track and to better understand what is happening in our societies. And for sure also to merge different competence and backgrounds in the newsroom. For example, the fact that AI is becoming so important for some projects into the public administration or in politics means that, for example, a journalist that usually covers politics should understand better what does it mean to apply technologies to that. So technology shouldn't be the panda cage in the zoo or the newsroom, but should be, as I say, an horizontal part as environmental also abilities and competencies in the newsroom, and embrace and merge with the attention to business, and so the consequences to business, embrace with attention to social and to, let's say, also politics. And so what does it mean to politics? What does it mean to crimes and security? The other part is how do we face with stories that regard the application of AI. I have plenty of examples, and maybe some I will recall in our conversation, but to me it's becoming more and more important to try to track these projects, try to ask the public entities to be transparent on that, while they are usually not, and try to understand and decrypt the black box behind that in order to understand what will be the implication and the consequences to people, especially for the ones that are privileged as the others into our societies.
And of course, Stefania's keynote has been so much full of insights. But part of what we have done with the Human Error Project has been gathering how, like, all the fields that you represent, so media, civil society, and the business of technology, are kind of what are they doing to respond to the issues raised by AI errors. So starting with you, Lorna, there was a very nice quote that I signed somewhere on this piece of paper from Stefania's keynote, which is the notion of ethical consumption that she was referring from consuming goods and, for instance, food that we do in ethical way. So I would like to actually ask you, and also to learn more about what you are developing in this area. What would be an ethical consumption of AI products, and what are you trying to contributing to this direction?
Okay, so one of the projects I'm working on at the moment is actually an EU Horizon funding. So think a little bit of the SDG goals. So here we have 7 responsibility goals. Top one being digital literacy. Interesting, so I know that was also discussed a lot. But also we've got trustworthy AI in there. We've got cybersecurity. So there's 7 of these goals. Also as part of the project is actually a playbook that you can actually use if you're developing a solution to actually check if your solution is actually applying these and succeeding to be digitally responsible. But also because we've seen a little bit, I think, with the SDGs and also with our DRGs, it can remain on a very sort of conceptual level. So how do we enable people to really put this into practice when you're developing a solution? And that solution maybe also has a big need for a business model. So we're actually building a toolbox where, connected to each of these DRGs, we're gathering as many open source tools that are available so that developers can actually have a look and see which tools they can use throughout their development process. Now that can be from the planning phase, so understanding, is my technology stack actually considering responsibility goals, but also through the development, particularly in AI. We've got some great tools, for example, where you can scan and see if you've got any personal information and you can delete that, or ways of actually changing information about individuals, but also tools for explainability. So there's different tools for developers to actually apply in there. And then I think the most exciting thing is, great, but can we show that this is really effective? So we're funding a number of projects where solution developers in the food system domain are developing solutions using the toolbox to demonstrate, and we will also then be doing research to test, has this actually achieved a business viability at the same time as also being digitally responsible? Because we see sometimes the argument of, I can invest in being responsible, but it's going to impact my bottom line. So the goal is actually to do it, try it, and test it.
And I was also very interested in the Twins Connect project, the one about that you described to me as a way for curbing surveillance capitalism. So I'm interested to know what that entails in this context. Yeah.
That actually was interesting with the discussion about the pandemic. So this is I would say it's like my pandemic project that got out of control.
Some people baked and you were like building.
Amazing group, actually. It's quite a large group of people who have been active for well over a decade, really in looking at can we develop technologies that are more privacy-preserving, respectful and responsible. And so the pandemic started and we immediately recognized there was going to be this contact tracing, tracking system. So because we're working decentralized entities, we thought, okay, we're going to build ideally an option that could be used that is a little bit more secure for citizens. Unfortunately, we had a group of UX designers, I say unfortunately, I think this was a good thing, who first of all did scenarios and checking what could the consequences be if this was actually implemented, even if it's protecting your identity. We realized that it could be used to block people from having access to services or to locations. And this went against our values, so we stopped the development. Because even though we believed in this ability to protect your identity, we did not want to contribute to a solution that would actually control people's access to public spaces and places. So we dropped the pandemic Corona app, but we continued developing it. And actually, it's going to be launched sort of open source this year. It's for solution developers to have a different way of interacting with your users, whereby the users themselves can create multiple identities depending on who I'm talking to. So I can have an identity for you, I can have an identity for you. What is an identity? It's actually a combination of credentials or bits of information about me. So I can give you one name, but I can give you a different name, because that's how we know each other. I can give you my address, but I don't give you my address. But then I can say, you don't need my address anymore, I have it back. So it's just a simple tool for connecting, but having, and it was lovely to hear the plurality. Yeah. It's actually recognizing a deep sort of sociological, cultural requirement on a human level that we actually are dialogical people. We have different identities. Why are we not building this and enabling it in the digital domain? So
that's very interesting. It gave me to think about the real name policy of Facebook, but maybe for another panel. And Ilia, instead, a quote that I liked from Stefania's keynote that I think really connects the conversation to the role of civil society is when she said, well, we will need to demand more monitoring and oversight around those building and beta testing AI on us. And that, of course, I would say is also the role of civil society. So I wanted to ask you, how is this taking shape, what you and Privacy International have been doing the past few years, just to show also how civil society is actively contributing to this conversation?
Oh, well.
In 5 minutes.
How much time do we have? The past how many years? I mean, I will talk about two different things. The one is an example of concerted efforts to a degree and on challenging certain practices and the lessons learned as well from that, and then speak a little bit more broadly about some of the challenges that civil society faces today. Because so I think the best example to give that comes to mind that is relevant here is the challenge of a company called Clearview AI. Probably some of you have heard it, some not. Certainly nobody had heard it until the New York Times published an article exposing the company's practices and explaining that this was a company that had built an automated image scraper that had, according to the company, scrapped plus 3 million images and had developed a facial recognition tool. I think it's took everybody by surprise, and the fact that nobody had heard of the company was a big factor in shocking everyone. It then had a trickle-down effect where there were challenges across the globe in a way that I don't think we've seen many times. I mean, there are challenges against many companies. So we've seen challenges in the US, in Australia, in Canada, and in Europe. Part of the European stream of complaints that were launched were led by Privacy International, where I work, where basically we did research, background research, we submitted data subject access requests, we did the technical and legal analysis of what was happening, and we drafted a template complaint in a way for data protection authorities. We submitted ourselves 2 of those complaints, and then we shared the complaint with other civil society that adapted it to their countries and submitted their own complaints. And then there were other parallel requests happening. What came out of each and every one of them was the conviction of the company. So in Europe, the data protection authorities imposed massive fines to the company. They asked it to stop the activities. They asked it to delete. Then from, if I remember correctly, Canada came with an even more revolutionary, in my view, response that they asked the company to delete part of the algorithm that was developed on the basis of the unlawfully obtained data. And then most recent news, like last week, I think it came out, where there is a massive class action in the US, and the company they managed to settle this, but has put it in a very precarious financial situation. So there is the possibility to build these movements and to work collectively, to share resources as well, and lessons learned, and to challenge and to bring these companies into a moment of actually existential crisis. On the same time, it's very difficult not to see the other side, where we found Clearview AI, I think it was 2022 that was announced, that they offered graciously their services to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry to help them with identified dead and missing, which it is in its face very noble, and of course something anyone would say, yes, that's great, but on the same time, how do we reconcile a company that has been unlawfully developing a product, and then to bring it into a context that actually the regulation is even less existing, and then how have we questioned what are the impacts of and the risks around using it? And when it brings a false result, like none of this has been conceived in the design, so immediately accepting it as a fact is actually problematic. And this brings also to the broader issues that civil society has been facing, and with AI regulatory frameworks has been even more present, where we have been cut out of discussions. The Council of Europe Framework Conventions has stopped, has cut out the civil society participation, and so, and where companies are using more and more the trade secrets and copyright as excuses for actually not having these open conversations we need to be having. And sometimes we keep falling behind developments as well, and that we need to be always reacting to the next thing. So reconciling those, I think, is one of the things we need to be working on.
And what you were just saying about not knowing about this company, which was making business with law enforcement agencies across the world, made me also think about the black box metaphor, that sometimes we refer to code and actual technology being non-intelligible by non-experts, but actually the black box sometimes is more legal and non-disclosure agreements, as you were saying. So that also made me think about the very nature of AI, which is not necessarily code, but the entire chain of production usually also goes through these things. And Luca said to you, the quote that I take from Stefania is that usually this beta testing of democracy happens outside of democratic scrutiny, which is what journalism does when it does things right, which is not often the case, but anyway. So in the case of AI also, AI has become like a topic of scrutiny for investigative reporters, but also in terms of exposing and holding digital power accountable. So the question to you would be, how is journalism responding to like the issues that both Lorna and Ilia have been raising?
It's very hard, I would say.
Goodbye, thank you.
No, because first, you know, the storytelling is the AI. It will make a thing move more easily, in a more efficient way, and so it, in some way, pushing governments to adopt this sort of automated machine decision, as someone mentioned this morning, that probably it's better to label this kind of projects. But sometimes we get this part of the storytelling and we miss the other. So that means, what is the project? How does it work? How does the story end? So what happens then? And we try at Wire to monitor this approach. And for example, I now recall two stories. One regards the matches at school. In Italy, what happens that year by year, there are some classrooms that are vacant. And so they need to match the classroom with the best teacher that is available to fill the gap. And there are many different parameters to select who is the best for that kind of subject and teaching. For example, what kind of subject do you teach? Where do you live? Closer or not to the school? How long has you been teaching? Are you able to support students with disabilities? For many, and we had to do this matching for something like 800,000 people, so a lot each year. And this usually happens manually. Okay, so people go to the local office of the Ministry of Education and they try to fill this gap saying, okay, Veronica, probably you are the best for this teaching. Are you accepting or not the classroom? Yes, okay, you get. We move to the other one. No, see who's the second in the short list, and we asked him, her, if he want to fill the gap.
So
we decide to do that. No, it's incredible. We decided to do this through a platform, so that automatically matches the classroom, the available classroom, with the available teachers. And the result was a total disaster. Schools started in September in 2022 until December/January. There are persons who are entitled to get those assignments that didn't get the assignment because they were overcome by people that are less titled, but because of the machine just get wrong doing the matches. Why? It was very hard to understand it. We asked the Ministry of Education a lot of documents, so we tried to decrypt the black box. We understand, for example, that the third-party contractor who created and designed the platform, for example, tested just on 100 capacity request, while we are speaking about hundreds of thousands of requests, so great. It doesn't take in account the right order of the parameters, so what is the parameter that winning in a confrontation with another, and simply they doesn't try to test, correct, check, and then maybe try to apply to a larger scale the project. And who is accountable for that in the end? No one. Can we understand how the algorithm works? No, because the contractor opposed its own IP, intellectual properties patent, to the fact that it could be shown to the public. So this, to me, means that we are creating a lot of obstacles to transparent and fair reporting about that. And we are facing a lot of this problem. In the last 2-3 years, a lot of projects now are becoming AI platform from the Italian and public bodies. And I'm really frightened of how I can face that, ask for transparency, and maybe also report to people in order to let them understand what is happening, what are the consequences of some decision, and who is accountable for that.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of
a positive message.
Yeah, I mean, no, but actually, I also think, as Stefania was saying, that sometimes we are a bit depressive, but I mean, I don't see any other way if I put together your answers. But before trying to imagining the future, because that's the goal that we set with this conference, I want you to reflect on what Stefania was saying around the pluriverse and this idea that we probably are trying to quantify whatever we could quantify about humans. But maybe we totally shouldn't do that in a certain sense. And we are not kind of being fair towards how different and how brilliant and how diverse humanity actually is. So the question I wanted to share with all of you is, by quantify anything that we can quantify, are we actually also losing something of our humanity? So maybe the entire idea of using these machines to read humans and make predictions around humans, should it be always there, I wonder?
I was a bit reluctant to take this because once I get on this topic, I may not stop, but I will. So my background actually for probably over a decade ago originally was more in experience design. And that, of course, but working in technology solution areas. So we had this continuous kind of interesting interplay between this desire for quantification. It is not credible, is not believable, also in the business world, unless we can quantify it. From the design world, it is all about quality. So and we had to try and find ways of quantifying the value that was being created. And I think that's where we have a society, particularly a power structure society, that demands if it's not quantified, it's not there. But as humans, actually, the biggest way of measuring our value is actually in qualitative research. Qualitative. I think I'm succeeding sometimes. Sometimes
rings a bell.
Not. But I think in this discussion, it's really imperative.
Yeah.
Because I kind of look at it. The sort of follow the money is a very important aspect that we're seeing where these errors are going. So the money side of things is that quantification. But if we can follow the value, we will actually start to frame it very differently, because the human values are different, but they can still be aligned with the financial, economic requirements and values. But, you know, rather than the money, the business, it's really the value.
Thank
you.
Brilliant.
Impressively short. Concur what was said. A zillion things passed through my mind while you asked the question and then you were answering, and I kept changing my mind on what I want to say. And so I'm not going to repeat how I agree. There is a limitation to the quantification, and maybe, especially with some of the models that are developed at the moment, that they are based primarily on using mass amounts of data, this might be also where they're going to find their death, in a way, their end, in a way that they are finding themselves trapped in a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's something we've been using a lot when we're discussing around predictive policing tools. Predictive policing are tools that have been extensively used across various countries, especially the US, UK. They've been for many years, and the idea behind them has been that if we are able to identify where the sources of criminality, like the neighborhoods of criminality are going to be, then maybe we can have more police forces there and we can prevent the crime. Or if we know that that person probably will commit a crime, then we will know. But there is a self-fulfilling prophecy into that. The more you police a neighborhood, the more crimes you will find. And then the more these numbers will increase. I'm not even going to the biased data on which these premises have been built. So that is where I think, hopefully, the human nature will surprise the data, and we will find looking for new things. That would be one way.
Well, regarding my point of view, probably to us as journalists, this should be raised as also a way to approach the narrative and the storytelling regarding technology. Recalling your investigation about Clearview AI, we cover also a lot, but since we didn't try to understand if we were into the database, and I discovered that 13 of my pictures were into the Clearview. I hope they are not there, but I don't know, because when I asked to be sure that they deleted, I didn't get an answer back, so hope so. But when I moved the data, the number, the millions of pictures to a story, and to a face, many people feel they can also appeal and ask to Clearview AI if we're in the same database. So I take this suggestion of Stefania as sometimes to change also the approach into the technology reporting, coming back to stories, the one that she showed before regarding the university in Netherlands was really impressive, because we need sometimes to do this, to link the numbers, the quantify, the data set to single stories to people, because it could happen to you. And so maybe this also could be in some way a trigger to a kind of call to action to people.
And now that I've heard you, all of you again, it came back to my mind a recent book which is called Algorithms of Resistance, that other friends and colleagues have been written, Emiliano Trere and Tiziano Bonini, and they say sometimes when we discuss digital power, it always feels like these gigantic monsters that we cannot overcome in any possible way. But listening to the stories that you have been just sharing, like building something different, or showing a government, or unboxing an obscure AI system that is messing up with schools in Italy, maybe shows that there is a possibility for resistance, or at least to push a different narratives into the system. Also, because we're all committed to not to be too depressive today, I would really ask you: is this resistance actually possible, or opposition? Call it as you
Very good. Thank you.
She starts, then you.
I think I call myself like a critical optimist. So it goes in a little bit of a wave. But no, I think it is possible. I think it is happening. And I love what you were saying. I think it's almost like, the technology will eat itself. If we keep having these major error situations, unfortunately, there are real people who are getting absolutely mangled in the system. Now, that is, it's horrendous, so that needs to stop. Unfortunately, but what that does do is raise the awareness, and I think this is where the media has a role of raising the awareness of what is happening. The unfortunate thing is it's taking for some people 10 years to actually get that corrected, so that's unacceptable. So I'm seeing, indeed, there's a lot of individuals, there's a lot of developers, there's a lot of people working in government who really want this to go well, but it's fragmented. And so it really comes down to that kind of power structures. And so I would love to see also, this combination of these organizations coming together. So how can these independent enablers come together to be a stronger body against possibly the larger organizations that we are unfortunately having to, fight against. But shifting it to a more optimistic, constructive, we're not fighting, we're actually offering a viable alternative. Way too optimistic.
I'm going to use this, I promise.
Offering a valuable alternative really, really resonates with what I was having in mind as well. And I'm going to kind of just follow from both of you with resistance. What I was thinking, a big issue we are facing also, and all of us in a way, is that we are always following behind developments. We are reacting to what's been happening. We are reacting and demanding that our data is being deleted. We are demanding to find out what's been happening with our data. We are demanding to find out how the social welfare system has been changing. We keep chasing behind things, and in a way resistance maybe has that, implies that we are always going to be reactive. And I'm wondering sometimes whether we need to be bolder in the way of thinking of that, and stop reacting, ignore certain of these developments, because we've seen a lot of these developments disappearing as well over time on their own. And I know we all feel doomed at times, but I also think we are all forgetting that in the history of humanity, all these developments are very young. we remember how to live without them. It's not even that it's that far behind. So maybe we shouldn't take them as a matter of fact always and just stop and being more creative with them. How to do that? It's a whole other question, but it's a starting point.
Well, from the journalistic point of view, I think the important, I recall my previous answer, is to try to make technology in some way present in the discussion in every sector of a newsroom, make people aware of the fact that technology is really having impact of every aspect of your life, and so we need to recall and understand what is behind in order to do a good job to our readers. And then the other things is maybe try sometime to get some ideas from what was the climate movements and the climate activists. They really create a great attention over what is happening. They're really impressing politics. And I maybe think that in some ways also that the tech activists should in some ways get some ideas from that, maybe get to physical, to streets, even the topics that they're talking about are intangibles or virtual, but because people need to feel the fact that something is happening and there are faces, people who can refer to support this form of the resistance.
And we still have 10 minutes before opening to the audience. So as promised, we will try to imagine our future with these very fallible machines. And of course, you're not entering the kind of prophet, futuristic, techno-optimistic arena. But if you look ahead to the struggles, to the mission, to the whatever we have to try to achieve, what's next really in this conversation? And I told you I was going to use that to offer an alternative. So what's next for your field, and what is needed for push forward this debate, which honestly I feel it's a bit blocked at the moment?
Mm-hmm. I think it's really open.
Yeah. And you have 30 seconds.
The future. Future.
No, 30 seconds.
Maybe three interrelated areas. So one of them is fairness, one other one is framing, and the other one is, as I mentioned before, it's the follow the money. So in the fairness, it's super interesting. So I've done also work in smart city domain. So I got a lot of insight into the physical world and the borders between public and private, which is very much a kind of regulatory municipality maintenance thing. It's a super interesting world if you delve into it. But of course, when we get to the digital, we start blurring those boundaries. A lot of the huge errors, I think as we've heard today, are coming out in areas that are actually in the public domain. So I believe it is fair that if in the public domain, public data is being used to develop these models, the models need to be transparent and public domain also. It's a little bit like Clearview. So if you've scraped my data, I own part of that model. Now that's fair, isn't it? So that's one thing. On the framing, I'm kind of inspired by Kevin Kelly, who also, when he talks about AI, he also says that there's no such thing as AI until it's actually in a context of use. So can we just dump the words AI? Can we even stop? Yeah, deflate. Can we just may not actually be in the field? So if we stop using the term AI, but actually look at the context it's being used in, is it commercial? Is it public? Is it private? We discussed this morning about the motor in the car or in the fridge or in the toy. Each one of those contexts has different regulations and requirements. And in some of them, it has a driving license. It has a very, very important regulatory aspect. So let's look at the application of these typologies of technologies, whether it's machine learning, whether it's generative, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Let's dump those terms and talk about what it's actually doing. So that's kind of the framing. And then the follow the money, it kind of, I think, bridges that as well, is who's benefiting, who's investing, and we see this in the pharma, who's invested, who's extracting, and what is the value. And I think we will also see when, and that's where we can actually quantify the qualitative aspects and actually see where that benefits. So public money is invested or public information, then the public should benefit from that value. So that's my 3 perspectives for a brighter, safer future.
Fair enough.
Well, it's very difficult to follow that. But I'll try. Well, the first one for me, looking at the future, would be moving, what was discussed before as well, moving from imagining the tech control to tech of care, where actually we are not starting, the starting point is not building a technology for the standard human, but we are, and then trying to correct and run behind who we left behind. But actually we are building a technology solution for the least, for the, I'm going to call it weakest, but not in the sense of a human, but the most, exclusive, vulnerable position, like excluded human that would then apply to the rest. So the starting point being different. It's what we've called in a previous campaign as well. Oh, my brain freeze. It was two campaigns we have on calling for that privacy is not a luxury, basically. And the most recent one that we are still having was advocating, we called it Best Before Date campaign, advocating for actually for manufacturers to provide software and security support to devices, not only the high-end devices, but every device from the moment of purchase, which is also something that is different, not when it was built. And it's something that we don't have. We succeeded in the EU, but let's see that happening elsewhere. And the second part is what I'm hoping to see is also being more creative in the way we conceive regulation and the dichotomies in which the current regulatory frameworks are built, being challenged. The most recent example being the EU AI Act that we have been discussing today. There is a very important exception in it, which is, I've already discussed with a few of you, no surprise, the military domain tech. It's excluded. And of course, the first thing we think when we think of military domain is autonomous weapons and killer robots. This is what comes to mind. But the reality in the military is that there is recruitment and job management softwares that are used. There is threat detection tools. There is mapping of an area to identify what is military, what is not urban. All these type of applications have their, they can be either repurposed or have their equivalent in the civilian domain. And quite often, and more often, these are built by the exact same company. So seeing those as two distinct things, that they're regulated but completely different bodies of law and regulators, actually is no longer a valid way of seeing how the technology's regulation. So that would be the two.
Well, and very hard to find a proposal. Well, mine could be a sort of, let's say, freedom of algorithm act. Let's say, following the idea of a freedom of information act that in many countries give you the power to ask public entities to disclose a document that has a public interest if it's not. We should probably have also the idea to disclose the algorithm if it has a public impact, if it's not. So that could help, for example, reporters, journalists to report on that, but also research and academia to do its scrutiny and some research over the use of these tools. And it's not something that is clearly, in some way, incorporated into the AI Act, so it could be something that should be in some of the delegated acts. And so why not? Maybe to support our media job.
That's very nice. And we have about 20 minutes before we close, so it's time for hearing from the audience. So if you have a question or comment for either one of the panelists or all of them, just raise your hand.
Have we got only one microphone?
We got two, but we need one, so yeah. Why not mine?
Any thoughts, questions? Last minute, end of the day reflections.
Hello, it's me again. No, so following the last possibility in the future, so we don't accept eating food which we don't know what it consists of, even though sometimes it's quite confusing what it really contains. But it's kind of an idea we have, right? And so we do that because it physically comes into our bodies, but then, of course, the effect of whatever we want to call artificial intelligence or the effect of information coming to us, we think it's okay that we don't know. So on that topic, I was thinking, again, for me, as we've been talking in the corridor as well, is that, regulation is massively important. Agree upon the values we believe are important. And the beauty of that is that, okay, Switzerland a little bit on the side, but as an EU, we are quite powerful in terms of we share some certain values that we believe are important, but we have actually stopped pushing that. Yes, we have some interesting in GDPR, etc., etc. So, but we are only doing it kind of half like in after effects of what has happened. So we need to kind of step back and say, okay, let's agree firmly on these values that we agree upon, and anyone who try to break that do not have access to our population, right? So what would happen? So this is a question to you. What would happen if we said today, as Brussels, we said, listen, ChatGPT or OpenAI, whatever you are called, if you're going to service or sell your services to our population, you have to put your black box and make it transparent. Okay, so as a theory, what would happen if we were so strong and then agree that we would force them to either service or not? What would happen to our society, let's say, if they did not come in then? So, okay, we will abandon Europe. What will happen to society? Question.
Just recall the fact that it happened, because last year the data protection officer in Italy stopped ChatGPT processing the data, the personal data of Italians, especially, but then Europeans in a broader way because of the GDPR, violation of the GDPR. What happens that a lot of people post the angry post on the Garante's profile just because they can't let ChatGPT write their own email or a presentation, but in the end, it doesn't happen anything. What happened that OpenAI changed a lot of its policies, anticipating some of the policies that are into the AI Act. So incredibly, it was also a favor from a competition point of view to OpenAI rather than to the others. So I think, yes, sometimes a firm attitude could be very helpful, and we should probably invest more on that. The problem is that in the end, the regulation is a product of negotiation, and include all this negotiation and all the timing in which the negotiation happened. For example, the French press a lot through Mistral AI, the OpenAI, the EU AI Act, into the computational power to define the large language models in order to have their own under this threshold, and so do not have to comply with a more harder obligation. So in the end, sometimes also negotiation doesn't represent this utopistic point of view, but just the timing and the negotiation between politician parties and, let's say, values.
I mean, another example, we were discussing before, we were talking about Google Classroom. In Denmark, it was rolled out during the pandemic. Parents challenged it, and actually now they're obliged to remove it. So they said no. I completely concur with what Luca said, that though we need to be careful that this is a process of negotiation and to find the right conditions for it. On the same time, maybe it would be useful to interrogating what's happening on the other side of the world that we don't look very much, because of course there are political interests and there are serious human rights violations issues that we need to take into account. But from Russia to China to Iran to, I can continue adding, they have said no to many of these technologies and they are developing their own solutions. And there was a New York Times article recently that was saying that actually the Chinese market in developing car ecologically friendly solutions has been much more effective because there has been a state regulatory framework managing that and leading all that. So there are lessons to be learned from elsewhere as well, and being inspired from elsewhere as well.
So maybe also be good to raise the question is, why do we not have our own alternatives? I am a big fan, of course, of the regulation, but see that it fails in many ways. It also does, it's a cat and mouse game. So the regulation actually inspires new behaviors to get around the regulation. But in the area that I'm in as well, we're looking at from the technology. I love technology. I'm in the technology world. But can we use technology to actually rebuild, I say rebuild, trust in the digital domain? Because actually what's happening at the moment is we are destroying the trust. For me, being involved with startups, it's imperative. We want our users to share their data. We want our users to contribute to the building of the solution, bearing in mind the startups I work with are impact startups. But because of what's going on in the wider domain, the trust is being actually really chipped away at. So I do wonder from the European perspective very much, why are we not investing in the alternatives that are matching the set of values and the legal framework that we have set up, instead of, it appears to be focusing on blocking the people who are faster and nastier. So that's maybe in answer to that. I don't think it will happen, but unless maybe enough of us actually start saying, look, let's build our own alternatives.
Yeah. I think.
Just a comment on this. I totally agree with you. I just, and it is getting very depressive now. I just wonder whether it is actually possible to capture where you either rely on them at a certain point or you just don't build it.
It is this depressive take. I mean, to be honest, I had the same question because they've been collecting data for 20 years or so from every part of society, and then you're thinking they are literally harnessing this data to make incredibly more sophisticated the platform. So, but it is a good question. I think it is a good question to ask whether we can develop our own technologies. And I don't know if you were following on the basis of your point before the debate about the Digital Market Acts and the inclusion of ChatGPT into Apple. And I was reading, and that was completely crazy. And people are saying, why are we limiting this? I had the question. I had the question here.
Thank you. I wanted to pick up something that Luca said and connect it to some of the discussions we had earlier in our Sustainable AI workshop. Which was I think it was very interesting how you said that the data activists can learn maybe from the climate movement. And I think that's absolutely right, not just because data is sometimes perceived as abstract and intangible as the climate struggle, because climate too is something like very abstract, but at the same time, both of these things are incredibly material. And actually data is incredibly material, and we didn't really talk about this very much, but of course, data centers take a huge amount of space, energy, material that has to be mined on land and in the sea. Most of our transatlantic internet traffic travels through subsea cables. It's not in the cloud. So it's actually incredibly material. It could be an incredibly material struggle. But it's not perceived in such a way. So I think that's something in the debate that we don't see very much. That it's often perceived as something intangible, but it's actually not really, and these infrastructures are quite hidden. So I don't know, it's just a reflection really on what that could mean for how we think differently about what resistance means, what sovereignty means. There is a very interesting concept called digital sovereignty that includes sovereignty about material infrastructures like data centers by Julia Ron, which I can recommend for anyone who's interested. But yeah, just as a reflection. Thank you.
Points, questions? Sure. So should we give another round?
Yeah, let's respond to the materiality point, and then if we don't have more questions, we can close this. I don't know who wants to start.
The materiality. Yeah, I think I'm trying to sort of understand more specifically what the position there was. So maybe a little bit more.
A twofold point. I think the first aspect was about resistance, because that's where that kind of comment was sparked. So how can thinking about these infrastructures as material infrastructures change our idea of how citizens can participate into how these technologies are shaped, owned, and evolve? But also more generally speaking, I find it fascinating that that's not an aspect of AI that we usually talk about. And I think it excludes a lot of really important political questions. So yeah, I think whichever level you want to answer to this. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it comes back to a couple of the points that I made earlier, also particularly with the framing, and I think also the climate activism. One of the things over the last few years, so before GDPR, I was working actually on a privacy platform. So we actually user tested in a number of European countries the value proposition of privacy. Being a little bit of a idealist, we were really excited, and this was actually for a large telco. But we were actually quite disappointed to see that it just didn't really resonate. It was really purely from a marketing perspective. So over the last few years, we've done more investigation, but also connecting it to social sciences and understanding what is it about this framing that makes it perhaps too intangible. One of the things is, and it's less about physicality, maybe it is, but it's about the timeline of the reward. And it's very, very closely related, I think, indeed, to climate action. So privacy, it's a concept that it's very difficult to place in the here and now. It's a much sort of longer-term reward, which is why we actually flipped and tested trust. And it was just incredible, the switch in just framing it to very basic. They will only use it for this purpose. So we had a whole list of statements. And across the board, it resonated. Privacy didn't. And I think that's maybe, in the AI domain, what is the framing and the language, and what is the concept, which is the challenge, I think, in the climate action world of how do we make that tangible enough to today that we can act today, understand today, and it can be relevant to us when we then know that it's actually a long-term future thing.
Thank you. I do represent Privacy International, but even as Privacy International, we do keep saying that we need to stop seeing privacy as the singular reflection of our personal attributes, that privacy most of the time will be, interference with the privacy will most of the time will be with an end goal to either control us or to further interfere with other rights. So the surveillance is the best example of that. Surveillance, especially for instance in authoritarian regimes, will be used to actually identify those perceived as threats and arrest them, kill them, detain them. It's a tool of control, bringing it closer to us. the whole system that the big tech collecting all this data with profiling have built is in order to be able to analyze it and predict for us what we need and sell it to us. So this, I think, is also so. I would be looking forward to continuing this conversation. In terms of what you were saying, I mean, the two parts. I agree. There are a lot of to be learned. Also from what didn't work as well, but also on the challenges with them, with these movements. And on the other hand, I think we really need to be working also more closely. Back to the example I brought before about our Best Before date campaign, we connected as well to the Right to Repair movement, and because it has a direct impact with how quickly you need to recycle your device. Because if it's not maintained, then it's more insecure, or it becomes slower, or it's no longer gets the latest updates. And then, so I think there are more alliances and bridges we can build there.
Yes, and I think also the fact that in September the UN will approve this digital compact that will create a sort of IPCC for AI, a sort of office for AI, will create the idea of having a sort of COP becoming from a climate nerds assembly now is becoming something that everyone is looking at. And I think that something could happen also with technology following the work of the new agencies and offices. And just a note coming back to the idea of having our alternatives. Europe had the opportunity with data centers and cloud when it started in Gaia X, and then that impossible naming alliances led by the European Commission just with the European operators. Both cases, they failed. They failed because there weren't a real commitment to support the creation of alternative. And so in the end, the latest news are that, for example, Amazon Web Services are investing something like 10 billion in Germany, 1 billion in Italy, and something like that also in Spain. So the commitment is really important to succeed to have these alternatives. Otherwise, they're just wishful thinking, and that happens, for example, for the cloud. And I think that we lose completely in that battle. We have an opportunity with the high-performance computing. Europe has a great network on the HPC, and they are also developing it for artificial intelligence. So I hope that this kind of really fast forward and looking forward technology could be the edge of a new battle to have a real alternative embedded with our own values.
Should we good? So just like because this is the separation between us and between this and the wine, which should be
keep it short.
Yeah. So I'm gonna be super short. First of all, I wanted to end on a couple of points. The first point, again, going back to the question about failure and error, there is something positive in failure and error. This is the interesting aspect of it all, is that there is something extremely positive in failure and error. Failure and error allow us to see the limits of our technology, to have that friction between what we think is the superpower of these technologies that are being pushed on us and our worlds. And in the moment in which we have a friction, we have a moment of reflection. And that, I think, it's very, very important. And that's why it's important to think about error, to think about failure and the way in which we relate to one another. So that's kind of my more reflection. And I wanted to, the other aspect of failure and error that I think it's very important to work on is the fact that they put us in front of the human side of technology. And that is what emerged very well today. Today in the morning with our conversations, it emerged very well with in Stefania's talk, in your panel. This idea that our technologies not only are human-made and so fallible, but also are ultimately fallacious when it comes to grasping the complexity of our worlds. And this is the second point that really clearly emerged today. The third point, and this is really a big, big thank you to all of you, because one question that kept on kind of getting into my head is this idea of empowerment towards disempowerment. Like Stefania said it before, people feel disempowered. People say, but what I noticed today is actually that there's so much good work. People feel disempowered, it's true that, but there's so much reflection about what we're doing, about how these technologies are being implemented and so on. And in different domains. And what was my big surprise is that I thought you were going to argue. The ultimate reason of bringing it to I was looking forward to a proper conflict, because I was like, well, you know what, I'm going to put entrepreneurs who are going to push for innovation and non-regulation together with civil society, who are going to only talk about activism and democratic futures, together with journalists who are going to try to be mediators in this. And that didn't work, because there was such a almost surprisingly, a coherence in worries, in concerns, in coming together and saying, let's work together, let's do this next step together. And so basically this was kind of like, it's not a super sophisticated reflection, it was a failure on what we expected this event to be. But I think it was very successful for what I learned from it, and I'm really grateful for this. And I'm grateful for all of you who stayed here. I know we have people that watch the streaming. We had many people registering as well. So like I think what this shows is that there is a possibility, we have possible ways forward. And perhaps one way forward is really to rethink about how we use the language, but also how to rethink our roles within specific contexts. For us, as educators in university with our students, entrepreneurs, for journalists, for civil society organizations, I think there's a lot of work to be done, and we are doing it. And and I just wanted to say thank you for this inspiration, really. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
So,
housekeeping, we will walk down from here to our office. It's just a few minutes walk. There will be wine and food, so stay with us, the fun begins. Jokes aside, also thank you to the people providing the video and streaming services, and to all the Square staff who's been amazing in hosting us. And a personal thank to all the Human Error team, and especially Rai, who has been astonishing this month, and to Veronica for leading us towards the end of the project. So thank you very much.
Organizations. I was like, this was all on you guys.
Us,
so thank you so much. Another point, our office is very close to the station, so if you then want to go to the station, it's right, we can walk all together very nicely in this sunny weather.
So follow us. Thank you very much.
Yes.